Hi, everybody. This is SAAD. Woke up this morning to the story about Kevin Hart stepping down as the next MC for the Oscars because of some obnoxious and homophobic comments that he had made either in a show and or on Twitter. Let me start off by saying that I looked at some of those tweets in question. I didn't see his routines where he might have said some obnoxious things, but the tweets are not funny. I fully agree with that, and I certainly live my life in a manner where I try to never hurt someone's feelings simply because of some characteristics of who they are. I'm the guy who in high school would have been standing up to the bullies, willing to fight them to protect someone who is being bullied. So I understand that people would be upset by Kevin Hart's comments. But of course, as many of you know, I also am someone who has weighed in quite extensively about the extent to which hurt feelings has become the currency by which we judge everything. In universities, it's no longer about the pursuit of truth. It's about the minimization of hurt feelings. If facts are problematic, then you should shut them down if they might hurt someone's feelings. Well, Kevin Hart is a comedian. He's not my favorite comedian. He's probably someone who comes from a context where these types of comments would have been viewed as appropriate. So he is a product of his environment to some extent. When I used to play competitive soccer, if every single person who levied these types of slurs were to today be judged based on what they said on that field, then a lot of people would be in Gulag 13. And this is in no way meant to justify or condone those behaviors, but I have been the victim of many of these types of comments. I used to have very long hair, and so when we would play soccer, I would be called all sorts of names that are not particularly fun to hear. Because of my ethnic background, I've been called camel jockey. When people know that I'm Jewish, I've been called all sorts of things. But guess what? I lived to love again. In other words, life contains ugliness. And one of the ways by which we deal with it is to be able to confront those types of situations and come out stronger for having faced them. You can't sanitize your way into a perfect world where no idiot ever says something that is inappropriate. Now, of course, yes, he does have a huge forum via the Oscars ceremony, and so people have every right to say, hey, look, you said some nasty things in the past, and we don't want you to be associated with our organization or with our event. I get that. But again, I think it's important to recognize that comedy is about pushing the line. Comedy is about taking certain realities and through hyperbole, making them even pointing to these stereotypes, right? I mean, if someone stands up and talks about, the neuroticism of Jews, am I going to get so offended because that's so hurtful to my Jewish identity? No, I have a strong sense of self that I'm able to laugh at this. I mean, Larry David's show, Curb Your Enthusiasm, is pretty much all about that kind of stuff, right? He is pushing the stereotype of the neurotic Jew. Pretty much every show that you could think of, starting with All in the Family, if any of you know it, not a single syllable uttered from that show, which is certainly one of the all-time classics of U.S. television sitcoms, could have nothing from that show could have been uttered today. So yes, the zeitgeist evolves so that things that were obnoxious and rude and hurtful yesterday may not be permitted today in a more civilized context. I appreciate that, and we should all strive to always be better people, kinder people, less hurtful people. But also, I think we really need to try to push back against this ethos, which I referred to in my Canadian Senate testimony, the I am a victim, therefore I am ethos. Some of you may remember this brilliant analogy that was proposed by a neuropsychiatrist who's actually reached out to me on, I think, a few occasions. He wrote an article, which I'll be discussing in my forthcoming book, where he compared, he used the hygiene hypothesis. That, for those of you who don't know what the hygiene hypothesis is, it refers to the finding that basically says that in order for your immune system to kick into gear, if you'd like, it needs to be exposed to certain pollutants. Say, for example, kids who grow up in environments where it's not perfectly sterile, where there are pets around, will end up having fewer respiratory ailments such as asthma, precisely because your immune system needs to be triggered, if you'd like, forgive the term, in order to function properly. And so he analogized that mechanism from evolutionary medicine to the sterility that you now find on university campuses, where no one is allowed to say something that is offensive to anyone, lest they might be sent to Gulag 13. And of course, he's perfectly correct. I love the analogy that critical reasoning, your capacity to reason, your capacity to debate, has to involve you being exposed to ideas that you hate, ideas that you find offensive. I mean, this is the mechanism, if you'd like, quote, this is the pollutant that you need for your critical reasoning capacities to kick into high gear. By the same token, a lot of humor is going to be humor that is frontal, that is, quote, hurtful. Now, again, I saw the comments that he wrote on Twitter, or at least a few of them, and they certainly did not seem very funny. They seemed as though they were coming from a place of sort of stereotypical homophobia. But again, what we need to do is foster people's strength of character, meaning the ones who are potentially victimized by these words. If your sense of self is so precarious that some idiotic comedian's tweets from 2010 become unbearable for you to handle, that doesn't speak very well for how strong your sense of self is. As I said, and many of you know, my personal history is when I was 11 years old, I didn't know whether I would live the next minute or not. That's the reality that I grew up in. I don't always bring it up to sort of outcompete others in the victimology game, but it's to contextualize the fact that through adversity we do become stronger. Not to sound cliche-ish, but that which doesn't kill us does make us stronger. And again, let's always strive to not be obnoxious and hurtful and rude, and let's all try to always be kind, but also let's not sanitize ourselves into oblivion. The world is made up of many vagaries. Some people are very nice, some people are obnoxious, some people are rude, some people are homophobic, and you can't legislate that away. You can't create a zeitgeist short of an Orwellian world where everybody always says nice things. I'll tell you one quick other story from my personal history, and I actually discussed this also in my forthcoming book. Many years ago, there was a professor in my department, a woman, who had made some very, very rude and obnoxious comments at the time about my weight, that I was overweight, that I had put on weight and so on. Stuff that someone else would have, tried to get her fired, tried to file a complaint against her. The way I took it was, this was a very, very rude and obnoxious set of statements that this person had made. But this is life. This happens once in a while, and I'm going to move on. Not that I condoned her obnoxious comments, not that I tried to justify her obnoxious comments, but I recognize that people at times are idiots. People at times are assholes. And I'm the better person for being able to rise above her fatophobia and move on. So there you have it. Have strength of character. Always try to be a better person, but don't head off into the corner, into a fetal position, sucking your thumb each time someone says something to you that is hurtful. Have a good day, everybody. Cheers.